Also remember, the holes that just formed in Russia don't count because those aren't man-made.
Oh, okay.
Like, because the
So here's the thing. It says in many places the temperature rises by about 25 to 30 degrees C per kilometer in the crust.
Wow.
I should translate this into what's your system called? Into
English system.
what?
The English system for our sins. Here in America, we use the English system.
Fahrenheit
Well, yeah, so it's
and
between
miles. Okay, I'm translating it into Fahrenheit and miles. So the temperature increases by about 45 to 55 Fahrenheit per mile that you go down into the crust.
50 degrees per mile? Whoa!
2 to 2.5 miles down, it's between 200 and 300 degrees Fahrenheit. 6 to 9 miles down, it's about 480 to 750 Fahrenheit.
Wow.
Humans working undergrounds at around 2.5 miles deep, it is extremely difficult to breathe because of the heat, pressure, and ventilation.
Whoa.
The deepest mines are around 2.5 miles deep. Rock temperature can exceed 140 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow. No trouble keeping your lungs.
Super deep borehole that reaches 7.6 miles deep has a temperature of around 356 Fahrenheit. There we go. A comprehensive answer for you, Roger, to your trivia question.
That's very, very good.
See, you could cook a meal if you just lowered it down far enough.
Now, see the obvious thing to go into after this would be extremophiles. Okay, so we've established 8 miles underground. What kind of extremophiles are there on the planet that could survive extreme environments like that?
Salamanders could. You know, the fire elementals.
You know what's fascinating is octopuses. Do you know that if you put them inside a jar and you tighten the lid on the jar, they can reach their tentacles up and put their tentacles on the bottom of the lid and twist it and unscrew the lid and get out of the jar.
That is so cool.
Oh, they are cool. You know, I wish Panyabasa were here. You know, he was a marine biologist before he became a monk, and he specializes in cephalopods. He talks about cephalopods all day. He thinks they're amazingly cool and as smart as people, maybe. I don't know anything about them, though, except that they have amazing eyes, apparently. Really good depth vision, which just kind of makes sense. And some of them get really big. Really big.
You gotta
They're apparently an alien life form, you know.
Well, yeah, there's a theory. I'm not sure.
Well, I think pangolins are an alien life form, if anything, and possibly giraffes. I've seen those pictures. That tongue, my God. That's not from this planet. But
when I was in South Africa, I went to the museum where the coelacanth, the very first coelacanth.
Oh, cool.
And spoke to the guy who worked with the woman who did the work on it. And he said that nobody has found a coelacanth nursery. They do not know how or where or anything about their breeding. They're so far down in the ocean that people can't get to them.
It's amazing. That is
so amazing. And they have 4 fins. They have fins on their sides and then fins on their tummy and back. And he says they're like little arms. They're like little arms with a fin on the end of it. And he says the theory is that they walk through tunnels. They go down through rock tunnels to some place where they live that's not the sea. We just catch them in the sea, but there's some other place. The theory is but there's some other place in the ocean blocked off from men by these tunnels, and the coelacanths use their little arms to walk through them to get to their secret coelacanth planet.
That makes sense, because when you think about some of the mass extinctions, even in the oceans, because of, who knows why, that would protect them and their nurseries. It sounds to me like somebody's going to be putting some kind of a transmitter or something on one of those guys and releasing them back into the ocean. That would be fascinating thing to discover. Yeah.
You see, you don't need to make up what sort of weird stuff exists in weird places that we don't know, because we've already got weird stuff that we could actually study.
Oh, yeah. Where do flying saucers come from? They could come from right here. There's so much of the ocean that is simply we know nothing about.
Well, there's so many different military organizations around the world who are flying things around the skies that they don't want anybody to know about. I mean, obviously...
The old argument that we know more about space than we know about on oceans.
Yeah. Well, the thing about the saucer thing, and one theory I've always been interested in, and of course, obviously, especially after the 20th century started, I'm sure a lot of military craft have been mistaken. I mean, one of my things that I go on about is the very first so-called modern saucer sighting, where they coined the term flying saucer, was Kenneth Arnold out, I believe, in California. And he did not describe them as saucers, which is interesting because the headlines picked up saucers and everybody started seeing saucers. He said they seem to skip like saucers. But the actual drawings, if you see what he actually saw, they look remarkably like experimental jet designs that we know people were working on at that time period. I've always kind of suspected, they had they kind of looked like B-2 bombers, like a flying wing kind of design. Not so jagged looking, but designs that like the Horton brothers were working on and continue to work on all through like the 1950s and 60s, right up into modern days. So, but then you've also got reports that I think are definitely reports of something that's very unusual. It's a unique human experience. And of course, these reports go back way before we had any kind of flight technology. So what's going on there? One theory is that some of these things people see in the sky are actually living beings of some sort, a life form that we simply haven't identified that could live. And the sea is vast, and there are vast unexplored areas of the land even today. If something is truly alien, would you even be able to recognize it? I always say, we've got on this planet other animal species that seem to be at least as intelligent as us. Dolphins, elephants. Even our pets are pretty smart, but we can't really communicate with them very well. How could we expect to somehow have a discussion with a completely alien life form, something from another planet? We can't even talk to our own dolphins. How can we even communicate with something with and dolphins share a lot of our genetic material, grew up on the same planet over millions of years. So yeah, there could be things here that we don't recognize. Something alien could be in the same room with you. Quick, look over your shoulder. It could be there now, but you wouldn't see it. How could you notice it? Philip K. Dick used to talk about something he called zebra, or possibly zebra, depending on what side of the Atlantic you're on. And he talked about it as being like an alien being that is omnipresent around us. It's so large, it's part of the environment, and we've always had it here, so we don't really notice it. And I think of Reverend Kirk wrote a book called The Secret Commonwealth. This was in the 17th century, where he talked about there's this whole other world that coexists with us, that sometimes interacts with us, but of which we're normally and probably blissfully unaware most of the time. So there's a whole can of worms.
It's what you believe is there is what you see. And all sorts of very strange things happen in our brains. And in fact, our memory, the main function of our memory, is to forget things and to screen things out. And we have to, in order to exist, in order to function on this planet, we have to screen out about 80% of the sensory data but comes in through our skin, through our eyes, through everywhere.
Right.
And one of the things that back in the olden days in Ireland, there used to be a witch who lived in a swamp who would come and get you if you were naughty and you didn't sleep. And people saw her often saw her. So like, what happened? Did people see weird stuff because their brains let in too much light, or a weird shift of the something? Or is it that we are prepared to believe what we already think exists?
All of our sense experience is the product of electrochemical processes in our brain. And that we equate reality with visibility, which is sometimes unfortunate. So that if you and I see a tree, we were talking about trees, and we both say that's a tree, and we use this common language, we know if I make the sound tree, it's going to mean the same thing as when you make the sound tree. And in this case, the light impinging on our eyes, the smell of the tree, the sound of it as the wind blows the branches, these are all sensory cues. And yet people perceive things that other people do not perceive. Now, we tend to mean to equate that as meaning, excuse me, that what the other person sees is quote unquote not real. However, you are still perceiving something. Something has impinged upon your sensoria. And of course, I include in the sensoria the mind, because the mind is also a sense object. And as Bob has pointed out quite accurately, I agree with her completely about this, the mind is the forerunner of all. The mind comes first. Any experience you have is going to be mediated by the thoughts already existing in your mind. So if you are prepared to see that witch woman, then you're going to see her, just like the people who read the headline, flying saucers, suddenly started seeing saucers in the sky. They were seeing something. There's something there that is impinging upon people's sensoria, impinging on their minds perhaps alone, although these things seem to leave physical traces too. But what they experience is different from what someone standing next to them experiences. And I've read of a lot of accounts like that. They tend to be dismissed because ufologists, they want nuts and bolt saucers that you can kick the tires on. They don't like this ambiguity that exists around this experience. So I would agree with Bob as far as the mind is going to, in a lot of ways, what you experience is going to be predicated on what's in your mind, and this can be manipulated. And that's where things start getting spooky and scary. I say spooky in terms of like spook as in intelligence agencies and stuff like that. I have long thought that Whitley Strieber, you guys all remember Whitley Strieber, Communion? That was the big book that started the big bug-eyed, big-headed alien trend. Before that book got pushed, people reported meeting all kinds of weird-looking critters coming out of saucers, blonde people saying they came from the planet Venus, little green men with pointy ears, normal-looking humans, all kinds of strange beings. But he started pushing, they look like this, they look like this, they look like, suddenly everyone was reporting these experiences, and they all were built around the kind of saucer mythology he was pushing about the genetic experiments and stuff like this. And of course, as I've often pointed out, and as I've tried to contact Strieber about, although he has remained silent on the subject, every single thing he wrote about was derived from a movie starring Peter Graves called Killers from Space. The entire saucer mythology, and I think it was made in 1954. It's on the Internet Archive. Anyone listening, I advise you strongly to watch Killers from Space. You will see every aspect of Whitley Strieber's saucer mythology there. Now, did he see this movie as a kid? And it kind of subconsciously shaped how he was experienced this? I tend to think he's a fiction writer. He said in the very foreword of his first book on aliens, he said, "I'm a fiction writer and I might be making all of this up."